Hi, I'm Steve Hackett. You're tuning into Rockseller TV.
Rockseller TV, Rockseller TV, Rockseller TV, Rockseller TV, Rockseller TV.
The first record you got with your own money was Ravel's Bolero. I wanted to see if you could talk a bit about that, and also how classical music shaped you then and how it continues to shape what you do now.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I guess as a kid, I didn't really realise what I was listening to was classical music. There's always been this mixture of an interest in the guitar, twangy guitars in the early days, but then there was this thing, Ravel's Bolero, French composer, Spanish music, strange, slightly dissonant, very proggy, crescendos, wonderful. So in a way, I always had that schiz thing, and luckily, music joined me in my schizophrenic tastes. By the end of the 60s, and certainly by the time the 70s set in, you know, those prototypes were already in place, and I guess all those boys in England that went to grammar schools like I did, a lot of them were very much, if they had a scholarly turn of mind, that was the kind of music they were drawn to when they became professional musicians.
Looking back at your career, there's always a crossroads that someone makes in their career when they do make it, where if they turn left, and they either turn left or turn right, and if you turn in the right direction, that's the right move. But if you turn in the wrong one, you know it's not going to happen. Can you look back and now in hindsight identify when that happened for you?
Well, there are all sorts of turning points in life, aren't there? Obviously, what was key for me was meeting Genesis. It wasn't as if that happened overnight. I advertised myself in the back pages of the all-powerful Melody Maker at the time. So many British bands formed off the back pages of that. You know, I'm talking about Led Zeppelin, Stones, you know, you name it. Okay, that's the way it happened. So 5 years of ads. 5 years I'm advertising myself and seeing lots of people joined the odd band, formed the odd band, but the important call really came from Peter Gabriel, and the rest is known.
Interesting. You know, you recently described the music that you all shared at that time as pan-genre, which I thought was an interesting thing, and I think it also demonstrates your post-Genesis career too, and what you did that as well with the type of things that you would do as well. But talk a bit about the group union of that shared pan-genre aesthetic and how that also transferred to what you do as a solo artist today.
Well, you know, I think there were two bands that I think were key to this, if I'm absolutely honest about it, and I think it was the Beatles, and seeing what they could do, because they had the world's ear, all the manpower they wanted, all the available technology, which was very little, but it was virtually being built up around them, around their requirements. And then you had King Crimson, who I think was similarly ambitious and managing to make big sounds, but with smaller forces, Mellotron being part of it, the legacy of the Mellotron via Beatles and their use of it, and much more reliance on it with Crimson. I'm thinking about bands that were pan-genre. I think the Beatles came from a vaudeville tradition. Perhaps there was more of an overt classical and jazz tradition with Crimson, a more scholarly approach. I think Genesis was perhaps, I wouldn't even say somewhere between the two, because this is really just about my own tastes. I know that those bands influenced us, but equally, of course, we were listening to everybody. We were aware of everybody, and not just not just one style. I was listening to Bach, I was listening to blues. That was important. I didn't think those two strands were going to come together. They did by the end of the 60s. Modern Jazz Quartet was doing an album called Blues and Bach and Blues, whatever it was called, and there's all the rest. Of course, you know, there's the input of all the free jazz stuff, Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane, all of that, and it's not a million miles away from some of the other stuff. You know, classical guys were going atonal and all the rest. The Messiaen stuff, all the scholarly stuff can sound just as out there. And of course, yes, it influences that big moment in the day in the life where the orchestra go crazy, all of that. But yeah, music was to take interesting turns, wasn't it, at that point? So I think the pan-genre thing, I think, stems from that. People that are maybe known for doing one thing, but they're aware of all these other things. And Genesis, of course, yes, everything from Pete was listening to, I think, Nina Simone, Otis Redding, Music Concrete, and Phil, the big band stuff, and you know, the romantic ballads, and all of that. Tony was very much, you know, classical, but at the same time, we shared a love of Roy Orbison, the great balladeer, and much more. I think Mike was more lyrical. It was more, I think, Judy Collins and Joni Mitchell. All of that was part of it. So you mix all that stuff together, and it comes out as early or classic Genesis.
Let's talk about the new live record, which is wonderful and really spans the breadth of your career, which was something that you weren't doing at the beginning for a long time.
Right.
When you would perform solo, post Genesis, you know, you were devoted to just doing your solo material.
Yes.
But tell people what they can expect with what you're doing now, and what you know, this record really does show up the palette of your career.
Okay, well, the album, I wanted to celebrate Wind and Wuthering, which is why it's Wuthering Nights. So a number of things from that album, plus Inside and Out, which didn't make it onto the final album, but should have been because it's stronger than some of the other stuff. And so I was very proud of the album and wanted to celebrate that. I also wanted to do, you know, the solo stuff, because that's been growing and growing and growing. And ironically, in recent years, doing better and better internationally in the charts. Nonetheless, agents and promoters have their heads around Genesis so much of the time, so it's not really a compromise for me to do the Genesis stuff, because I'm so terribly proud of it. And now, even now, you know, guys in the van on the way here are talking about, you know, what tracks they really like. Fountain of Some Artists is a big one for the Swedes, it seems. And we have two Swedish guys in the band. We have Naz Sylvan and Jonas Reingold on bass, so he's new for us. Nick Beggs is working with Stephen Wilson this year. He seems to work a year on and a year off with me. But Jonas is really, really good. I've never heard anyone who can play Bach on a bass and play jazz bass so fast, and he plays everything from upright to fretless to pounding Rickenbacker. So that's fabulous. Yeah. So I would say the current set covers the whole of the history in as much as you can, because I've done massive stuff. So we'd be here for weeks. It'd be like Wagner, you know, and I can't do that to people.
A residency.
A residency. Maybe it'll come to that at some point. But the thing is, you've got to train people up for all of that, and it's not easy. But Jonas was a very fast learn. He got Los Endos overnight, I think.
I understand.
You know, that's damn good.
I understand you keep your ear out for new musicians that are interesting and creative and inventive. And there's one that I actually worked with that played with you recently on the cruise, the recent cruise, who's in the Dave Kersner band.
Yes.
Fernando Perdomo.
Right. Yeah.
Who for me I think is the monster player out there. Do you have any impressions of playing with him?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it very much. We had a bunch of us all blasting away on the cruise to the edge, doing Stranded, which was great fun. I was pleased to be able to do that. And I think Dave's great. You know, he's I think a great attracts great people and works as a conduit with many things. And I think that very broad approach has served him very well. I think so. He's gaining ground all the time.
What were your impressions of Fernando Perdomo as a player?
Very interesting. Very interesting, I have to say. So great to work with those people, and it's nice, you know, when people are able to pass comments backwards and forwards to each other. Guitarists are usually quite generous about that, you know. It's not always the case, you know. I find often musicians can be very competitive, and but usually I think that generous. What am I trying to say?
It was generous of you to play with these people. I mean, that means a lot to them. Someone of your caliber is going to play with them too.
Yeah, but I think that if you're committed to music and if you're in there for the long haul, it's very much a level playing field. It's like whatever we can't get together today, we'll get together tomorrow if you're listening to everybody.
What do you identify as the beginnings of progressive rock for you? When did it first hit you that, or you heard the word being used?
Okay, it goes right back to the early 1900s. It's Richard Strauss talking about the work of Edward Elgar, The Dream of Gerontius, which is a big choral piece, quasi-mystical thing, and he considered it to be progressive, I quote. So, what was the year? 1910, 1911? I you know, but it's around this sort of era, and so the term is being used as a substitution for the word programmatic. In other words, music in classical terms that tells a story, very similar to Brog, right? You know, you see this thing. So maybe the progressive idea comes from that, but I've got my own take on it, and I think that it's very much like scenes from a film, but for the inner eye or the inner ear, I think that's it. Music that tells a story. We don't necessarily need a video with it because the music is colourful. It takes you on that journey. When music really works, it casts you right out into space and back.
Well, you brought up A Day in the Life, and to me that is a mind movie without a video.
Yes.
And the interesting thing is something I learned recently, and I've spoke to you about it in the past, but it would be great to get you on camera speaking about this, is a very unlikely fan of Genesis was made known to you guys when you were traveling, John Lennon.
Yeah.
Could you tell us the story about that?
Well, we were traveling in the United States for the first time.
Genesis, right?
Genesis, yes. In 1973, we had just done Selling England by the Pound, the album that I feel is Genesis' best, certainly with my involvement. And Scott Muni was interviewing Lennon on WNEW, and said, "Oh, are there any bands you're listening to at the moment?" And he mentioned Genesis. He said, "One of the bands I'm listening to." So it would have been marvellous to have tweeted that straight away, but 1973, no one had mobiles, never mind tweets and all the rest, you know. We were still on gas. We're still on gaslight, you know what I mean? So no one really knew that until arguably today.
What was the reaction among everyone in the van?
Well, it was great. I could tell Pete was very pleased. He was the one who gave me the news. No one else made any comment. Genesis is a very strange band. They internalize everything. Talk about very little. It's extraordinarily reserved. It's very English. It's very repressed. It's very creative. All of that. But all of those contradictions, I think, are probably what make the music strong.
I guess the last question, you know, I was
Has
going to
to
ask
be.
you this later, was about Phil, Tony, and Mike have been receptive recently about a Genesis reunion, and I wanted to throw that out to you because I'm sure the fans are hoping that there could potentially be a chance. What are your feelings about that?
Well, I'm open to it, but I don't think it's going to be likely. I think that the changes that were wrought in time? Is there enough common ground? Can those guys still play those songs that we wrote together? It became a very different vehicle. Much as I would love to say yes, I would attempt to, fit in. But if there's a reunion, I very much doubt that it would involve me or Peter Gabriel, frankly. But I do think I'd like to say this, that I think that Pete is really the father of Genesis, and without him, it's, what can I say?
But there was a reunion in 1982, right?
Yeah, very briefly. Yeah.
What was that like? It was in.
It was a great feeling to be on stage. Very emotional for all of us. Only time I'd ever seen everyone really let down their guard, and we were all hugging each other for the first and last time ever in our lives, I suspect. But there we are. It was really amazing. Even though it poured with rain throughout the whole gig, the gods were displeased, but the humans were ecstatic. Certainly backstage.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
Rock Salad TV. 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 Rock Salad TV.